Okay, you know the drill. There's an inspirational video, and then we'll have the panel. Yep. So the panel will assemble. I'm just going to run the video.
I don't know if you know, but Bayview, next to San Rafael, has the highest rate of cancer. We don't have a lot of fresh, big chain stores in our community that has fresh vegetables. We have kids growing up with asthma. We also have natural occurring asbestos in this area. And I think these are the issues that have brought us together, not only faith-based, but nonprofits. We want to make sure that Bayview is a symbol for the whole world. One of the first issues that I had to deal with was high cost of energy. We were actually paying almost $60,000 a year to run the church. So what we did was went back and relamped our church. They came in and installed the solar system and the panel system. And we were able to save over $30,000 a year. Our energy bill wasn't going up at a time when everybody else was paying more for energy. Our energy bill was actually going down. And by doing that, we were able to take the monies that we saved and put that back out into the work of the church.
I haven't had one person come to me and question what's done. And that's very unusual in a Baptist church because even here, you know, when we're praising God and telling what's right, there's always different opinions.
We have a food pantry, which was started during the recession that we had about 4 years ago. The food bank serves about 340 households. Each family, we average that they save $25 a week on their grocery bill. That $25 a week transfers to $100 a month, and you're able to take that money and put it somewhere else. But the main thing is that your kids do not have to go to school hungry. They can sit down and concentrate. They can sit down and learn and study. And this is part of the cycle on poverty, because if you can get educated, you can get a job, you can end that cycle on poverty. So little things like fresh vegetables make our community better overall. After the Katrina incident, we decided that we wanted to not have it happen here. We work with SF Card to help train our community. We are a disaster shelter where we work with the American Red Cross. PG&E paid for us to have a cache of emergency supplies, generators, so that if we do have to take care of our community, we'll be able to do it. Resiliency is being able to do what you did before the earthquake or storm after the storm, because they're not going to come to Bayview first. They're going to go downtown and take care of what's downtown, the financial district. The first 72 hours is chaos. We must be able to take care of ourselves and then have them come and ask us for help.
Okay. So in this final session, we've kind of, you know, if we're cooking, we've done the menu, and we've done the shopping, and we've done some pre-preparation, and we've gotten approval for our meal, and now we have to do the work. And this is what this session is about. It's about getting the work done. It's the action. It's also the fruition. So we're going to start. We're going to start with Mark. And Mark, we've introduced Mark. Take it away.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'd call verification. So when, you know, we've got a design, and a lot of times, even though you'll have code inspectors come out and there'll be certain requirements depending on what jurisdiction you're in, a lot of times there's a lot more that can be done and should be done to make sure that the design actually makes it into reality, if you will. So when we're talking about the the energy use of the building, if we kind of pick it up in the beginning of construction, then we follow it through the construction process, the end of construction, and then we actually look at it in service, and then we want to keep looking at it, not just stop because we're done. So in order for that to do that, and I'll say also that when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about more new construction, but it's actually applicable to really any project, even an existing building that you're not doing anything to or not doing much to. So I mentioned in the other panel that you can do commissioning, and so this kind of applies to an existing building where you want to create a baseline. So the baseline for an existing building is just how much energy is it used the last couple of years. If you're doing a renovation or an addition, that's still a pretty decent starting point. As for new construction, if you talk about a baseline, it's a little bit more challenging because it's completely new. You don't have anything to refer to. So new construction, a lot of times there'll be an energy model that can be used as a baseline. Potentially you could talk to like a mechanical engineer, get an idea of how much energy the building should use. Now, again, I'll give the caveat that with an energy model, you want to make sure that the energy model has good schedules, has the right equipment and all of that to make sure that it's going to be an accurate representation. But again, it's a good starting point. And I'll come back to that a little bit more, but during inspection or during the construction process, we want to do inspections and testing. So one inspection that doesn't really get done unless it's required that I always recommend is an insulation inspection. Just make sure the insulation is installed correctly. It is amazing how often it is not. And the general contractor, the site supervisor, a lot of times they don't have the expertise, or they've got 62 different things that they're trying to manage and worry about. Just get somebody out there that's an expert in insulation that can inspect it and make sure that it's installed properly, and make sure that you're getting what you paid for. Also, make sure that it's actually installed to the level. A lot of times we'll get the proposal from the installation contractor, and we'll go out there and we'll say, well, what's up there is not what you've got on your proposal. So, and I find that with general contractors, if I say, well, the energy efficiency is not going to be there, it kind of goes over their head. If I say to them, hey, you know what, you're not getting what you're paying for, then action will be taken very swiftly and very shortly. The other inspections would be air leakage testing. Air leakage is definitely a huge energy cost, and it's also comfort. And when you're not comfortable, what do? You turn up the heat. So getting air leakage inspection, and that would be another thing, is actually maybe have in your specs, what does the air leakage need to be? And then make sure that it's tested and meeting that. And then the other one would be duct leakage if you have a forced air system. Just make sure that the air is actually getting delivered where it's supposed to go and not leaking into building cavities and whatnot. And then commissioning. Commissioning is basically just the idea of checking particularly mechanical and lighting systems to make sure that they're operating correctly. Depending on the level of complexity and basically the size of the building, there's definitely some commissioning that can be done throughout the course of the installation process, the construction process. But basically, a lot of it is done at the end when the systems are started up, and you have a third party that goes and makes sure that everything was installed properly, make sure the system's operating properly, make sure that the schedules, because as I mentioned in the other panel, just having your if you have a building information system, or if it's just a programmable thermostat, making sure that it's actually set up to work right is a huge piece of energy efficiency. And it's pretty simple, but again, it often doesn't happen. So, and then getting back to kind of what I started with, there's ongoing monitoring. So when you have that baseline, it's really helpful to just look at that baseline year over year. And you can start to see like, oh, whoa, our energy consumption way up. Like, what's going on? It's the first indicator that maybe there's something wrong. Maybe somebody messed with the schedules, or maybe there's a problem with the systems that they're not running efficiently. If you have something like an energy management system, or an energy monitoring system where you can actually look at the different end uses and they're actually being monitored, there's definitely all kinds of systems these days, from something that you plug into a residential, into your circuit breakers on your home, all the way up to the most complex commercial system that basically allows you to actually look at the end uses. So then you can start with, whoa, we're using way more energy than we thought, or than we expect, or that we did the year before. And then you can start to see, okay, it looks like that's the heating system or the cooling system, or, it just gives you the ability to look at that kind of stuff. I will say that Energy Star, the portfolio manager, is a really great tool for that. It allows you to track your utilities. It allows some benchmarking. That's another one. If you don't have a good baseline, you can at least get benchmarking from Energy Star for a like facility and see where you're at kind of compared to the averages in your climate zone. And then it also allows you to track net zero energy progress. If that's your goal, if you're actually tracking these things year over year, you can hopefully start to see things go down, and what where you're at versus that net zero goal. The other thing that I'll just say is just a little tagline that I meant to mention when we were talking about inspections. We always say, expect what you inspect. And if you don't inspect it, you're probably not going to get it.
Yeah, so the mistake we don't want to make is hey, we don't have time to do it right, but we do have time to do it twice. Let's not make that mistake. Okay, so we're going to move on with Ambra, and she's going to provide you with a roadmap for the work once you get rolling. Ambra?
I have some slides.
Okay. And then the clicker.
One thing I just wanted to comment to on Mark's last comment about Portfolio Manager is Excel has actually made it really easy. You can connect with them now, and they'll upload 3 years of data. So that helps you, determine if you've done a lighting upgrade.
Ongoing also.
Yes, and so once you connect with Excel, then they'll continue to upload it. The only thing that doesn't upload is if you have like Tiger Gas or another like independent gas company. So, but yeah, if you have Excel for both gas and electric, it will continue. But basically, I want to just start off with saying the vision for the roadmap is a significant number of faith-based communities have become inspired and empowered to take action that demonstrates a viability of converting their facility to be based on renewable energy. Many are also actively working with their own congregations to inspire and empower their congregants to take similar action. Through making these efforts highly visible in the community, the leadership by faith communities inspires a larger community that significantly accelerates the adoption of renewable, regenerative living lifestyles. First found around energy, but then also centered around other critical areas like food, use of resources, and relationships to the natural world. So this roadmap was basically designed through a collaborative effort from the Green Faith community in Boulder, the city of Boulder, and the Partners for a Clean Environment Boulder County program. And so I'll briefly present the roadmap. So currently it's still in a draft format. It's a 35-page document that basically outlines your roadmap to net zero. And it also creates steps that your faith-based organization can take to become more energy efficient, save money, and achieve net zero. This roadmap clearly defines a clear and simple way to understand where you're currently at, what are the major steps on the journey you need to energy efficiency, and organizes the steps in a way that's most beneficial for your organization. The roadmap is a guidebook to efficiency and 100% renewable energy for faith-based community goals. Some of these goals are support faith-based groups to take action toward 100% renewable, profile your work and inspire other groups and individuals to take action, and distribute their efforts to other cities and foster joint city initiatives. So the way that the roadmap is outlined is it's organized by several major tracks of action, and each traction is part of the process to improve energy efficiency, transition energy use to electricity, and source electricity from renewable sources. And the end journey is achieving 100% renewable emissions of pollutants, such as CO2 from building operations. And as you can see, these are the different tracks outlined in the roadmap. And here is the larger scale checklist of the big picture of what we're trying to achieve. So as you can see, we've talked about it and discussed it throughout some of these panels today. Step one is really getting the energy audit, and that gives you a bigger picture of the next steps that you need to take for energy efficiency. And then from there, benchmarking using Portfolio Manager or other such benchmarking tools, and understanding the commercial utility rate structure as we discussed today. And then upgrading lighting and other low-hanging fruit. And also, I would say, in addition to that, looking at the building envelope and making those upgrades to make it a tighter envelope. And then from there, switching from HVAC to gas or electric systems. And then lastly, invest in solar PV systems, or also if solar is not available, you can also look into REC resources, so renewable energy credits. And then achieving 100% renewable or net zero. And probably the last thing that this guide provides that I would really encourage all of the faith-based organizations to do is adopt a manual or create a binder and project checklist. And within this document, it does have a checklist of dates, who was responsible. And this is, a great resource that can be passed down from energy manager to energy manager without loss of information. And it does have, outlines some of the actions. So have you upgraded the lighting? And creating this binder, you can also use that as an operations and maintenance manual. So you can keep, specs of what the lighting was that you replaced, or how often, do things get maintained or need to be maintained. So you can keep that in this binder as well and pass that on to the next energy manager. So with that, thank you for listening, and this document will be made available online at a future date. So David will be releasing that. Thank you.
Yes, so we're involved with this long sprint, and the people keep changing. So year to year, whoever was working on the eco ministry suddenly is working on something else, and it's really important to have that continuity. We've seen it time and time again. Okay, so we're going to move on to Arthur, who is going to talk. Arthur's going to talk about the work is done, what work remains. Yes?
Thanks.
Yeah, perhaps. Okay. Let's see what we can do here.
So this is the implementation section at the end. And this is the implementation section at the end. And I'm sure we're all inspired to go back and make changes to our building and do the things that we've made notes of as we've gone through today. But while we're doing that and while we're in the process of planning to make these changes to our buildings, I'm going to offer you something that you can do right away, and that is buy carbon offsets. And our church has been involved in doing this at the tail end of our program rather than the beginning. And we've done it for the reason so that we can buy carbon offsets to compensate for 85% of our natural gas consumption. And once we have done that, we can then, at least on paper, be carbon neutral, not our building, but overall. So to do that, 3 years ago, we raised $1,500 and bought the planting of about 800 trees. And in the subsequent 2 other years, we've also raised a similar amount of money, but we've substituted some of the trees with efficient cook stoves. And we've done this through an organization called Trees, Water, People. They are in Fort Collins, and the number of trees that we bought, the saplings, are about half of this quantity, so a serious number of trees. And these are grown at CSU in Fort Collins and purchased by Trees, Water, People, who are an organization designed to help people have a better life through a green lifestyle. And for the last 20 years, they've been working in both the USA and Central America. And they have planted 30,000 trees in the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. And you can see the large number of trees they planted in South America. So this is something that you can do by making the donation. And for further information, there are leaflets on the tables outside regarding Trees, Water, People. We've been using them now for 3 years, and we really feel it's worthwhile to complete our carbon neutral process. So I want to switch topics now and say something about how I can witness to the effects of the demand discussions that have been going on. We installed the Braden system in 2012, and it paid for itself in the first 12 months. And in the 5 years following, it has saved our church $8,000 per year. That's $40,000 in savings. And Bill said that typically by using the demand management system, you can almost double the savings that you get from the solar system. And I can lay witness to that because our solar system benefits just from the solar system alone are $9,000. The additional benefits are $8,000, so a total of $17,000. So the demand system is almost doubling the benefits that you get from the solar system. You can look, at least with our meter, you can look on the Excel website at myaccount.xcelenergy.com. And if you work your way around their rather complicated site, you can pull up the billable demand screen, which is the green one there, and see your demand for 24 months. And if you haven't got a demand energy system and want to assess whether your church is a good candidate to install one, this is the first exercise you should do. Go to your online account and look at the billed demand over the last 2 years and see what it is. If it's higher than 25, you are, and not too much higher, you are then a candidate to drop that down and get it from the SG rate to the C rate and reap tremendous benefits by doing that. Well, with that, I close and wish you all the best for your your progress towards net zero.
Okay, we're wearing Bill out, aren't we?
What? Last but not least. I changed this from war stories, warnings, red flags, and scars to implementation. So I want you not to make all the mistakes that I have made and my customers have made, and that's how we learn, and that's how we do things right, as we make mistakes and move on. So just very quickly in the next 6 minutes, just a couple more details. These are typically the kinds of loads that we control, that we look for. These are loads that in general have some sort of storage, and mostly this is thermal storage. And of course in churches, we're really talking about water heaters, HVAC systems, and electric heat. And as I mentioned, every once in a while you'll find a baptismal heater that's a large size, that's great. But what you're really looking for is loads that can be turned off for short periods of time with no inconvenience, discomfort, or impact on the operation of the building, or in this case, the church. So this is my green bucket of good loads. Typically things that we do not control is anything that plugs in. So computers, coffee pots, any kinds of appliances. Lighting, for the most part, we don't control. For a while there were some controllable lighting technologies out, but they really did not work well, and they were expensive, and what they were was a technology in search of a paying market. And so when LEDs came along, that just wiped out the entire fluorescent, and LEDs are far superior. So, but we don't need to control them. The best thing you can do is turn them off when you're not using them, but the demand control system doesn't need to do that. You can do that. As I said, any load that would cause a disruption, discomfort, or inconvenience, we stay away from. So we're trying to operate in the background and maintain comfort and convenience for the customer. Now you get into some middle ground here, and electric vehicle charging stations are really a problem if you're on the C rate. You know, if you're trying to stay below 25 and you put in a 10 kW charger, or in the case of, Jim said he had 4 of them. He's just barely eking out under 25. I mean, he's going over 25 sometime in the future. I mean, it's guaranteed, because randomly the natural diversity of load will be disturbed. Now, what that means is the overall random on-off cycle of all the loads in the building, it's like the perfect storm comes together, and he's going to peak over 25. And there's no way around that. I mean, I'm sorry for my watch beeping at 5 o'clock here. So that's one thing to really think about if you're trying to maintain the C rate, is whether or not you want to install electric vehicle charging stations. Refrigerators in a church kitchen, you know, not the walk-in kind, but the open-up kind, we generally stay away from those. And the only thought there is it's a potential issue with food loss, so it's not really a good idea. And one thing I didn't put on here that I should have is we've run across a number of churches with commercial kitchens, and because they're a commercial kitchen, they have a commercial dishwasher, and the commercial dishwasher has a 15 kilowatt booster heater that's required by the health department to be operational. And, you know, I can control anything. I'm not trying to brag here, but you can control anything. It's just a matter of should you control everything or certain things. Now, the best thing, if you do have natural gas and you're going to keep natural gas, you could look at a natural gas booster heater, because the value of you getting below 25 kW is far, far going to outweigh the cost of doing that. Another warning sign is I've had a number of congregations that are under 25 and they have a potluck dinner or some function and they come and bring 10 or 15 crock pots, which are uncontrolled loads, and they blow themselves out of the water for that one time. So be aware of issues like that when you have a function with people bringing in crock pots or heating plates or anything like that. Ovens and ranges, for the most part, again, that's a safety issue. Now, in Arthur's case, because we were grasping at straws to come up with enough load to control at Mountain View Methodist Church, we actually built a special sub-controller that when it does shed the range, it has to be turned on manually before it's operational again. And again, that's a safety issue in the kitchen. We don't know who's in the kitchen, kids, etc. And when that thing goes off, we need to make sure that it's manually restarted. And I haven't heard anything bad from Arthur about this, so I presume it's working satisfactorily. And only other note on mini splits. I love mini splits. They're very, very efficient. The problem with them is they don't use a standard thermostat loop like regular HVAC systems. And because of that, depending on the brand, sometimes they can be very difficult to control. So it just, I've told a lot of people, the answer to every question in this demand control business is it depends. So it depends on which brand you have and what it takes. We have spent a lot of time with tech support with some of the mini split manufacturers to figure out how to correctly be able to control them. So moving on here, just quickly, a demand control system measures the instantaneous demand that I referred to this morning. It averages the demand averages that instantaneous to come up with an average demand over the demand interval. The key in demand control is to compare your demand limit or your speed limit with the increasing rate of increase of that average demand. So as you're coming, if your average demand is coming up very, very steeply like that, you have to take action, or the controller actually has to take action much earlier. If you're coming up with your average demand like this, which means your instantaneous is just over that limit, then you can wait. The controller waits and waits and waits. And what it's really waiting for is it's hoping the thermostat satisfies itself first before it has to step in. Or any load like that. Hopefully the water heater will turn off, or the base load that's measured but not controlled will turn off. And the reason that's important is that we're talking about this natural diversity of load concept. And if you disturb this natural diversity of load by starting to control loads, the building then doesn't catch up as fast. It takes longer to recover and everything to get satisfied. So we've gone to great efforts to create a algorithm in the software to try to work with natural diversity of load instead of against it. So I'm sorry, I just kind of got off there on a tangent. Once we decide that it is time to shed, each load is assigned a priority. So we go after the lowest load first. Is that enough? Yes or no? If it's not enough, we go to the next load, the next load, the next load, until we finally get that instantaneous demand below the limit. And once you get that instantaneous below the limit, by definition, the average demand is going to go like this, and you're not going to go over this limit, which if you're trying to stay below 25, we usually set these things at 23 or 23.5 to give us a little buffer. And that average demand will round out, and then when it goes down far enough, the system will start to restore things. So just a couple of details. Load priorities are just established on basically the relative importance of each load to each other load in your building. And of course, there's some factors here to determine how important a particular load is. For instance, sanctuary air conditioning might be number one because when you need it, you need it. Whereas a water heater with much more thermal storage, it can be off for an hour or so. especially if it's way oversized. So I talked a little bit about this first. We're looking for the worst of low load factors. That means that you're peaking like this and there's no kilowatt hours to support it for the most part. If you have electrically intensive operations, which is the same thing as saying if the building's on all electric, and if you're just over that 25 threshold. So the roadmap to installation here is, as I've mentioned earlier, we study the history, compute load factors, or do that load duration graph that I showed you. Look at the times of high activity in your church and see, how long are these functions going to last, and do I have enough load to control that I can make it through those periods of high activity, and then which is these controllable loads, and then install the system and monitor it. And we have an online monitoring system that will do real time as well as historical, so you can have that data and show that data as it's happening if you need to. And that's good as a tool for someone who's assigned to manage the system in an organization. Okay, that's all I got. Thank you very much. It's 5 o'clock. Yes, sir.
So if you have something that comes on just when you're really high and goes over the limit, does it take action then immediately to shut something off?
So the answer is it depends. And it depends because the algorithm uses both the instantaneous demand and that average demand. And so a load that comes on for a very short period of time has very, very little contribution to your 15-minute average demand. So depending on this rate of slope, it may not take action. If it says, I'm right up against the limit here and I need to take action, then it will. But, it's all done with math. So, yes, sir.
Does such a system disable in advance certain loads because at times when the net demand is reaching a point to where if that given load turned on, it would put it over the limit? Can you disable things in advance so that they can't be turned on when your demand curve is high enough to where it could push it over the limit?
In general, no, because we're always responding to the load that is presented at the meter. So if a load turns on, we're measuring it. And so we don't have, with a demand control system, the ability to schedule or to lock out loads, except for a time of use rate. You can lock out certain loads the entire on-peak time. So we might be able to set up some sort of a scenario where that might work in that sense. So,
okay, we carved out some time. I would like to present the video that I was not able to present earlier. I think it's a good bookmark with Bill McKibben. This is going to be Bret KenCarn with the city of Boulder, and it's just simply wonderful, and we have the time, so here we go.
Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be able to join you, even if it's just in this way, and I hope that David has conveyed why it is that we agreed that it would be most productive for me to stay where I am, but still be able to offer a few words. And I also just want to express my gratitude to all those who've been a part of bringing you all together. It's such an important conversation. I have really just 3 areas that I wanted to cover today. The first, of course, is just the significance of this time and the challenge that we face, and a couple of thoughts about that. The second is what it is that needs to be done, like how we're actually going to effectively address that challenge. And the third is what I think some of the roles of the faith community could be in that effort. So in terms of the challenge, I'm not going to dwell here. I know that you're hearing from Bill McKibben, who's one of the best spokespeople on this topic. I would just note a couple of things. That in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's recent report, they identified really 2 fundamental areas of action that we're going to have to be taking, whereas previously we'd only been talking about one. Most of the work of myself and many others in many cities has been focused primarily on how we're going to reduce emissions. But because we haven't done that effectively, essentially what the IPCC said is not only do we have to do that at really monumental levels, but we're now also going to have to participate quite actively in how we bring carbon back out of the atmosphere. And so, and I would actually offer that there is a third, and this is extremely important and also very interesting, not a topic that we'll get into today, but how do we, in the way that we bring carbon back out of the atmosphere, actually enable us to begin to buffer and mitigate the effects of climate change locally. So it's very interesting. Carbon is not the problem. It's where we're putting carbon that's the problem. We've basically released way too much carbon, not only from those fossil prehistoric stores, but from the soil itself, from the terrestrial systems. And that when we have that carbon there where it belongs, it actually enables those landscapes to hold water. And when those landscapes can hold water, imagine it as this massive sort of reservoir of moisture that is actually helping to both buffer extreme temperatures, but also literally create the weather that we enjoy locally. So there's enormous amounts of really exciting work to be done in how we actually work with those natural systems to take that carbon, turn it into that kind of rich community that's in the soil, and then therefore hold water that can help us buffer our landscapes or buffer our communities. So again, that's the challenge. The second part is what needs to be done. So specifically in the context of emissions reduction, there's essentially really three things that we have to focus on. The first is that we have to generate as much energy as possible from renewable sources, and the one that we know how to do that with is electricity. So the first is to drive our electricity generation to essentially 100% renewables as quickly as possible. And as some of you know, there's exciting legislation in the State House right now that would actually push Xcel to have 80% of their electricity produced from renewable sources by 2030 and 100% by 2050. Now that's revolutionary, and we need to make sure that we do everything we can in the next few weeks to make sure that legislation passes, because we have to have that 100% renewable energy source. The second piece is then turning all of the places that we use energy towards electricity. And so that's one of the reasons why, as we think about how we're going to transition houses of faith and worship to a more renewable, sustainable context, we need to basically figure out how do we take all those things that we might be using natural gas for example, and turn them into electricity. That's not always easy, it's not always cheap, but it is the direction that we ultimately need to go. But then the third piece, which is often not talked about as much, is how we create these energy systems that are resilient. Because the reality of this world that we're living into is that there are going to be a lot more disruptive changes, and that in that context of disruptive change, we're going to need to figure out ways that we can maintain those basic needs and services that we have to be able to stabilize our communities through those changes. David and I are actually working on how we can partner with a number of the faith organizations in our community to identify those that could actually make their facilities available as sheltering locations during disruptions, and then look at how we can augment their energy systems in ways that not only create that resilience, but are also a part of that emissions reduction process. So how can we use solar plus batteries plus other control systems to make it so that they actually reduce their energy and their bills, but also then, if the system goes down, they could be operating and providing those basic needs. So those are the three areas. Drive our energy sources to electricity, make that electricity 100% renewable, and then build resilient electricity systems. So finally, let me just talk about what the role of the faith community can be. I know a lot of your discussion today is going to be talking about how we take the facilities of our faith institutions and make them more sustainable. That's super important. And I guess to build on that, I hope that once and as you're doing that, you identify those ways that provides information and knowledge and experience that your parishioners and your members can see and take into their own homes. Because the reality is, the more prepared we are in our own houses and homes, the more aligned we are with our values and how we're using and sourcing our energy, the more freedom it actually gives us to help transform and guide and support the transformation of that larger system. So that's all very important. It is not, frankly, however, enough. Because I think that this perception that somehow we're going to change the world one person or one institution at a time is a somewhat outdated notion, especially at this time where we have so little time left. The only way that we're going to create the changes that within 10 or 15 years change the course of our trajectory is if we change the systems that we're all living within. It can't be the most expensive and most difficult thing to do the right thing. It has to be the easiest thing. And the way that we have to do that are basically three. So the first is, yes, please find ways, if at all possible, to lead in your community by showing how you're bringing your facilities into that new world. The second is, look at how we can actually participate in changing the policies, that both at the state level and at the national level, that actually change the rules that govern all this. And so there are several very exciting efforts there. Certainly one of them is to connect to what's happening in the state legislature this year, and that there's 3 bills at least that are really moving in this way that should be supported, I believe. The second is look at some of the national legislation that's moving forward, the Green New Deal. Frankly, there's a lot of hype and attack on that right now, which generally actually means that there might be something really good in it. So keep an eye on that. The real meat of that isn't going to start to emerge for another year or so, but start to tune in and figure out how you can participate. But the third is to figure out how we remove our support from the institutions that have been continuing to support the destruction of the earth. So look at where our insurance is placed, look at where we do our banking, and look at where our own assets are placed. That divestment process is one of the things that is driving systems change most quickly right now, and it's a place that, in fact, for example, the Church of England's push on Shell Energy has caused enormous change in what that company is saying and doing in the world. So I think that as these spiritual and religious institutions start to work both individually and together to really demand that our values be represented in where we're putting our money, that's going to have a huge effect. So I hope those things are useful. I do want to say that the final closing point for me would be, we're not going to solve this alone, even as a species. We actually need the assistance of the larger natural world, which in my view and in my experience is standing ready to help us. But we're going to have to find a way to turn back towards it with some humility and some reciprocity to say, how do we work together to take a whole bunch of this carbon back out, to put it into the soils and to the landscapes where it belongs, and that by doing that creates a more verdant, more nutritious, more uplifted world for all of us to live in. That's the hope and the opportunity that sustains me in each day. It is a part of what our faith communities have always carried and held in our communities, and it's why I'm really depending on all of you to help us in this work. Thank you very much. I hope you have a fantastic conference. I hope that in any way that we can be of support to that, you'll let us know. Thank you.
Well, questions for this panel? Or I know we're kind of at our end time, so it is time to close. But yes.
So Mark Bloomfield mentioned in his presentation about having construction work inspected after it was done. So if you were to search the web for companies that do that, what would you search on? What do you call companies that do construction inspection?
Well, so specifically, if it's after construction, that's usually called commissioning, and that's what basically anything regarding mechanical systems, lighting systems, that sort of thing is generally referred to as commissioning. If it's on an existing building that's been in operation, it's called retro commissioning.
Well, that's what the process is called, but what do you call the people that do that do the inspection?
Commissioning agents.
Commissioning agent. Okay, thanks.
Yep. And then as far as other inspections during construction, well, we call ourselves green building consultants. I would say that there are, you could also look for like envelope consultants that would be able to make sure that the envelope is being constructed properly.
Thank you, panel. Let's give a round of applause to our last panel. Thank you. And please stick around for a couple of minutes. We're going to just have an opportunity for you to just shout some feedback at us and whatever else you had planned, David and Milt, for this last piece.